we are going to do disease detection. My name is Todd Carlton. I'm territory manager from the Northeast. Disease is kind of a second path that I send people down after the first year that they're on CropX. Thanks, Scott. So when I first get people going on CropX, I'm like, listen, get comfortable with moisture, get comfortable with the basics, and then dive into some of these other things like nutrition and disease. One of the things that we're going to get into about disease is we do have a decent amount of crops, but one of the things that we do not have is everything. And I want you guys to know that that's actually okay. So when we look at the diseases that we have, I'll tell you from what I've seen in the field and some of the stories that I have and some that my colleagues have, we do a really good job on the things that are on this list. Are we perfect all the time? No. But how do we do this? How do we start a lot of these processes to get diseases on this list? Well, a lot of it came from the acquisition of Dacom that you guys have heard a couple of times about. And, you know, if you're in specialty crop, this is great for you. If you're in broadacre, there's some things that we do well, but there's going to be some bridges that you'll see that I'm going to try to create with some other tools that we have. So here's a little bit of verbiage. I don't want you guys to get caught up in it. It's very wordy, but it's one of the things, it's part of the bridge that I wanted to make on where we fall short on disease and where we can kind of bridge some of that gap, and is actually with ET. And some of this you've probably already seen in the ET presentations, and I've got a pretty good story about how ET can make up the gap, especially in the broadacre crops that we don't have. And again, I'll breeze by this because I don't want you guys spending a ton of time reading it. If you want a copy of it, I'd be happy to send it. So if you haven't focused on disease in the past, right here in the middle is disease advice. If you've got a crop that, especially say potatoes in your area, this is a tile that you want front and center, especially as the season gets underway. And this is where, just like with moisture, red bad, green good. And this is where I want you to start at. As we move forward to looking at some of these crops, you know, a lot of folks that are part of your organization or organizations that you touch, corn's probably a pretty big deal in what you do. And I will say with gray leaf spot, northern, common, they do come in at the same time. And given what the company that we acquired knows about these diseases, it's pretty dang accurate. I feel pretty comfortable. But you're going to say, hey, Todd, well, you know, these diseases we solve quite well with tar spot. I promise you we'll get to how, you know, we can help you through tar spot. Again, this is with potatoes. I would say if you've got potatoes in your area, you better be leaning on disease. It might be something that if I'm in an area like Wisconsin, Idaho, somewhere like that, the Dakotas where potatoes are prevalent and they're common, get on disease earlier than later. I think it's a big selling point that you'd be missing out if you kind of took the more reserve approach like I do in a lot of cases where it's learn moisture and then add some of these things on. Again, we've got winter wheat here. Same deal. Not many diseases on winter wheat, but this is what it looks like. And one of the things I do want to point out that you'll see in all these is the spraying condition. One of the stories that I have is actually based upon that. I think in some circumstances, it's probably not always applicable to follow that, right? Like wind is always an issue. You guys in Nebraska, spraying conditions are not always perfect, right? I mean, it's sometimes you just have to go. But on the flip side of that, if you do have a little bit of time, you do have a little bit of, you know, headspace to actually look at this and use it, it can actually be a huge benefit. And I'll tell you a little bit of a story about that as we get into it. Here we go. This is what I really wanted to get into. The other stuff was just kind of a setup for what we're doing. So when I talked about bridging the gap between what we do in disease and what we do not. So disease, again, I think we do some things quite well, but again, I'll go back to my tar spot. So we have a large cooperative in Indiana that we work with. And they're like, hey, you know, some of these other diseases, they've got some specialty crop in the South. They've got a few other odds and ends where they can lean on the disease model. They're like, hey, Todd, this tar spot thing is not working well. How can I get it on the platform? Well, unless Harmon back there is going to, you know, come and learn how tar spot is affecting the United States, which is still kind of hard to quantify in some regards, tar spot's going to take a little bit of time. But what we can do in that regard is use the disease model, use some of the spray conditions, and use ET. And you're like, well, Todd, why in the heck would I ever use ET for disease? You said you have a disease model, but it's not on there. Why would I use that in the place? Well, in this particular cooperative, one of the agronomists that I work with actually tracks ET. He actually uses ET to look at how the crop is performing. If I would have left on that very wordy page, you would have seen that evapotranspiration declines as disease sets in. The stomatal openings actually start closing up. The plant is preparing for war. Most of the wars that it prepares for, unfortunately, especially with tar spot, it is not going to win. And so in this particular case, they were about 2 weeks, 10 days, 2 weeks ahead of their normal application of fungicide. And so they rolled the dice and they said, we're going to go ahead and spray this field. The ET dropped on it. We found tar spot at very early stage. We're going to go ahead and spray it. And then for fun, we're just going to let this other field ride until the plane's ready to go ahead and do it. When they did that, there's a 35 bushel loss. That is absolutely, I don't care if you're in $4 corn or $7 corn, that's still a lot of money. So again, we might not be perfect in disease, but there are things that we can do within the CropX ecosystem that can help you fight disease. But when we go to the central sands of Wisconsin, potatoes are pretty prevalent there. There's large potato growers there. And we've had a lot of success in that part of the world where they've actually utilized it. Because again, as you saw on the list, potatoes are highly representative on diseases. I don't remember the specific numbers. This has been 2 years ago when they came to me with this, and it's almost second nature to a lot of those guys that rely on it. But they've had exponential poundage increase because they've gone and followed it. And at first, just like with the probes, they didn't trust it. But after a while, going out there and verifying, the trust came. And they've been able to actually increase yield just by utilizing the system that's already in place that they don't have to pay anything extra for. When I look at what is a part of the disease is our spray conditions. Pioneer Flower Farms, they grow tulips. They're in the Niagara region of Ontario. He has the ability to be very directed with what he's doing, and you can imagine this gentleman has millions of flowers. That the acres aren't like you would, and having thousands of acres of corn. A little bit different animal, but a highly valuable crop. When he goes and sprays, he follows spray conditions. He does not have issues. Granted, that's not applicable to everybody in the room or within the area that you service. But the point that I want to make is he's been following it to a T, and he's been quite successful with it. So when you look at some of the tools that we have, they may not always be perfect for what you're doing, but there is some application in there. And then the last one's New Brunswick, Canada potatoes, extremely large potato operation. It's not, interestingly enough, it's not distributed equally across their entire organization. Not every region within this potato group uses our system, but they're a previous DOCOM customer. They've had good success with it, I think, for what they said about a decade, and they continue to use it. And Harmon, how long have you guys been doing the disease model at DOCOM? 30 years. So if you think about that in ag tech terms, that is an absolute lifetime. And when you think about that, if they are able to survive and make a living in a business doing things with that disease model, they must be doing something right. And just because you're moving it to the United States from there doesn't mean it's that wildly different. When we look at some of the conclusions from this, underutilized was the very first thing that I thought about, because when I think about my dealers and I think about the people that use it, it's actually one of the most underutilized things that I have in my territory. And I don't know if that's by design or by nature, but it is severely underutilized. But if you listen to some of the use cases I have, and I think Keith, you've got one. Would you mind sharing that real quick before I get too far into this? Yep. Yeah, and and another reason I put underutilized in there is I think we're missing a lot of dollars per acre, especially in high value crops. I think to some degree in the broad acre crops, but that's why I put that bridge component in there. Again, because it falls short in some places doesn't mean it's bad. Everything has limitations, but there's ways to make up where one thing is weak. There's another tool to help you make better decisions. Not complete. It follows right under, not being utilized enough. Not complete, again, is okay. What we have a lot of confidence in. Just as you heard from Harmon, who was with Docum well before the CropX acquisition, 30 years of doing this. Again, I think it says a lot about what those guys put together over there. The Avado Bridge, I'm still getting used to the new name, so just bear with me on that. But the Avado is the bridge. Again, where we are falling short, where we have some weakness in our system, there's still some tools that you can utilize. Now, it's not like it's going to be an overnight success for you to understand exactly how it's performing. You've got to have a little bit of time with the system. You have to understand the trend lines as you get into rapid growth. And then, you have to have some understanding when disease would potentially set in a crop if it's not listed. But there is a bridge within the system to do that. And the thing that I encourage you all to do with this and with the ecosystem within CropX is the question you need to always ask yourself is why not? Back in 2011, I was working the first time I ever lived in Southwest Iowa, moved up out of Texas, came to God's country, farming never ended. And there was a gentleman that lived right down the road that we sold to. His name's Bill. And Bill said, "Hey, Todd, I want you to come out and I want you to look at this particular field with me." We get there, the beans have senesced. I thought we killed it. I mean, he can tell I'm having a panic attack because we did his custom application. And he thought it was a pretty good joke. And so he let me ride for a little while on my anxiety. And he said, "Todd, these are double op beans. I bought them out of northern Minnesota. We plant group 2 to 3 in our neighborhood. There could be some 4s, but 2 to 3 is pretty common." And he said, "Listen, I'm going to go combine these things. They're going to be a month early." He said, "I'm going to get a premium at the elevator because of the time of year." He said, "Then I'm going to get my tile work and I'm going to get my dirt work done. This farm's going to be ready to go for next year." And I was kind of confused at the whole thing. He went against the grain of the system. And I said, "Well, Bill, what's the reason behind this?" And he said, "Todd, there's no rules in farming." He said, "We are so stuck in a way that our grandparents did or our fathers taught us that we don't question why not." He said, "There's no rules in farming." He said, "Right, you don't want to break the law. You don't want to go spray a non-GMO crop with Roundup or something like that, right? You don't want to make dumb decisions." But he said, "We got to get out of our own way." And so that's one of the things I wanted to leave you guys with. When you look at our platform, when you look at the things that we do quite well and the things that we have to bridge, always ask yourself, why not? Like, are there ways that I can connect dots and correlate? And I think if you take some of the open-mindedness into that and with your customers, that you think when you first walk in there, disease might not be on the table. Well, like Keith had a great example. His customers are all in on it. And they were actually early adopters compared to a lot of mine that I kind of gradually stepped into it. So I wanted to make sure I left you guys with that is always ask yourself, why not? Because there are really no rules in farming. And I think for me in my career, it has served me quite well because I don't get caught up in, well, this is what dad did, or this is what grandpa did, or my best friends, and this is what their family did. I always question, how can we do it differently? How can I connect a dot a different way? And I think CropX has that. I think with the disease that, like I said, where we're great, I think we're awesome. And where we're not, we have some tools to make that gap up. And wanted to thank you guys. Any questions? I know we kind of went through that a little bit fast, but I wanted to see if we had any questions on this or anybody else. Jason, if you've got any comments on disease that you've used in your part of the world, feel free to share those.